In 1982, the first Indiana Jones game was Pitfall. This is not up for debate. I'll fight anyone. It beat Atari's official Raiders of the Lost Ark cartridge to stores by several months. Once Raiders of the Lost Ark arrived, the uneven history of Indiana Jones games was off to the races. I'm not about to bore you with an entire history and my own takes on 40+ years of old Indiana Jones games, because I already did it. Back when I was a staff writer for the original owner of the Raider.net, I played every single Indiana Jones game made that we could find, and reviewed them on the site. Fun fact, any article on that site that ends with MF, that was me. Not shorthand for what I know you're thinking right now. I reviewed every Indiana Jones game up through The Emperor's Tomb, which was sent to us at the time directly from Lucasfilm's PR team. So if you'd like to hear my thoughts on all of the older Indiana Jones games, head over to theraider.net and learn to enjoy reading again.
If you were to draw a line through these ancient sites around the globe, you get a perfectly aligned circle.
The Great Circle.
Exactly.
In the interim between Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb and today, Staff of Kings has been the only major Indiana Jones game, coming out all the way back in 2009. With Kingdom of the Crystal Skull released in 2008 and Dial of Destiny 15 years later in 2023, the wait for Indy's next game after 2009's Staff of Kings was oddly the same span of time. And so, just before the end of 2024, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle has been foisted upon us. The gaming hype sites and the fanboys who can never get out of their own way are praising it as a masterpiece, while dumping a slew of 7 ratings on it in their typical fashion. Meanwhile, I'm over here having just cleared the game, and frankly, I can't figure out where all the praise is coming from. The Great Circle is a derivative plotter that doesn't feel like Indiana Jones. Before we start in on all of the things that don't work about this game, let me get the positives out of the way, because there are all of those people out there watching this with that type of fragile personality that just can't handle it if something positive isn't said in every discussion. I swear they'd actually want you to say something positive in a presentation about Adolf Hitler because they're that emotionally weak. So here goes. The vocal performances of Troy Baker and the crew are extremely good. Baker really sounds like Harrison Ford most of the time.
He said the Sanctuary of the Guardians.
Huh?
Maybe they were guardians of the Idol of Ra.
The graphics in the game are downright impressive. They clearly put a lot of their development budget into trying to achieve photorealism of the scenery and the environments. Well, with the exception of that dogshit skybox toward the end of the game, which jumped out at me like a brick in the face after the slavishly gorgeous visuals that make up the rest of the experience.
Father Ventura?
Jesus! The best thing about this game is Tony Todd, which should come as no surprise. He commands the screen, and he's as awesome as ever. Given his recent passing, I was really glad to see him one last time.
The last chance to leave. Hello? Life is precious, even yours.
But that's really about it. So now that the positivity police have something to teethe on with their binky, let's get into the real review. I'm not going to waste time giving you some beat-for-beat plot analysis, because this is supposed to be a game, not a movie. It fails to find that balance in both directions, but we'll get into that later. What I do need to discuss with you before we get into all the game stuff is the nature of the opening they chose. The intro sequence of the game chooses the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark itself. Using their first-person perspective, they put you in the opening scene from the original film, looking for the Peruvian idol in the Amazon jungles, and it takes you beat for beat through the events of the film, with only a few seconds of gameplay between cutscene events. Gamers cite this as a tutorial level, but what it's really doing is getting you prepared for the game's insufferable format of giving you a few minutes of gameplay before interrupting you constantly for often interminably long cinematic sequences. Machine Games' manic devotion to their idea of accuracy in this opening is oddly broken by Indy grabbing his hat out from under the door instead of his whip. How and why they got that detail wrong in an exercise like this is baffling to say the least. The main point of the sequence is you get the idol, and as you're running out of the temple, you begin to hear Marion's voice in your head. Damn it, That's when any experienced gamer realizes this is a dream sequence. Indy wakes up with a start in Marshall College right as we expect. A few things bother me about this choice. Using Marion's voice from the Well of Souls and their desperate attempt to escape the snake pit in conjunction with a nightmare would have been far more appropriate and thematically consistent. Indiana Jones is deathly afraid of snakes, and the Well of Souls event in his life sent him into his own personal hell on earth, with the thousands of snakes surrounding him. Combine that with Marion, the love of his life, also being in mortal danger, and that would have been a killer game opening. He would wake up from his dream after we played through a truly haunting sequence culminating with the toppling of the Anubis statue, or possibly even the zombie corpses. Marion wasn't present in Peru for the Idol Temple sequence. Hearing her voice there, as well as Indy having nightmares that bring him back to that specific event, makes no sense. It's just another example of your average Indiana Jones fan being fixated on the idol grab scene and forgetting that the film is about the search for the Ark of the Covenant. And this addiction to the idol grab scene isn't limited to Machine Games. Hasbro made 4 Indiana Jones figures in their 2008 line that swirled around the Idol Temple scene. In 2023, they made an idol grab Indy for their Adventure series line, and then immediately reissued him with an included idol pedestal accessory rather than give us a different version of the character. SH Figure Arts and Mezco both indexed on the idol grab scene as well with their announced figures the very same year. And Lego opted for its big Indiana Jones set in 2023 to be the idol grab scene as well, instead of anything reflective of the actual plot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, a setting they also made sure to prioritize over other locations in their 2008 range. So yeah, Machine Games pulled the ultimate indie muggle fanboy move by forcing the Idol Temple scene to be Indy's nightmare about Marion. Just stupid. You wander through Marshall College at night because you hear a ruckus in one of the artifact halls, and you find a giant Tony Todd stealing an Egyptian cat statue. You try to fight him, but he gets away. The game is programmed to make sure you don't win that fight. At this point, you decide, based on a medallion he left behind, to head to Rome to visit a friend of yours at the Vatican to see if he knows anything about this towering thief. And what I'm about to say next isn't exactly serious, but I do find it really funny that neither Marcus nor Indy make any attempt to call the cops after the theft in the college, because it's only been a few hours, and a guy that tall who looks like that in 1937 Connecticut would probably be easily spotted. Marcus tries to stop you because it's midterms and Indy needs to be with his classes since he just got back from another expedition a few months ago. Marcus then tries to guilt Indy by reminding him when he returned from Siwa recently, Marion had left him in the intervening weeks. Now, I understand Marcus butting in where Indy's father is concerned because it's made clear Marcus and Henry Sr. were peers, and Marcus watched Indy grow up at the same time.
Your father and I have been friends since time began. I've watched you grow up, Indy. I've watched the two of you grow apart.
And while they do have a conversation about Marion in Raiders, Marcus is dismissive of any concentration on that and staying focused on bigger priorities.
Possibly. Marion's the least of your worries right now, believe me, Indy.
So having them make Marcus Indy's unsolicited life coach in this story doesn't work. It just makes Marcus look like a contrived plot device to force the Marion issue into the story, even though that's gonna go nowhere, because it can't go anywhere, because we know his next big adventure after this will be The Last Crusade. Marcus tells Indy not to run from his problems, and Indy's like,
Watch me.
which is again totally out of character for the man Indiana Jones is in these adventures. Yes, he'll comically run from serious trouble at times, but this whole idea that Indy is a deadbeat in relationships was started by Disney with Dial of Destiny.
Why didn't you ever talk to me about it?
Because we never had an argument, I won.
So, tone-deaf plot device here, we're not off to a good start. You get to the Vatican at night and the gameplay begins. First, let's address the game format. It's first person, which is a terrible choice. Indiana Jones is an icon in terms of his clothing as much as his persona. Here we have a game company trying to sell us premium alternate looks for Indy, like his professor outfit or the Temple of Doom look. But what's the point when you can't see them during 90% of the gameplay? Are people really that stupid they'd spring for these extras that you next to never see? Maybe they thought making Indiana Jones like GoldenEye would be a great approach, but that's only if the game is predominantly a shooter, and they chose stealth. This is one of the most confusing choices the developers made, and their rationale is even more of a riddle. They claimed that Indiana Jones was not a guy who used guns.
gonna blow up the ark, Renee!
I think I'd cover my ears if I were you.
On what planet they arrived at this conclusion is unknown to me. Based on that very broken logic, they determined Indiana Jones was more of a stealth character.
With a gun and a whip.
I think they've disastrously confused Indy not being the strongest in fights with stealth. Being on the back foot most of the time doesn't mean you have to be a ninja. Indiana Jones does his share of moving in quietly. I'm not denying that, but that's a minimal amount of the time. He's always either caught and has to throw hands, or he's deliberately taking the direct approach. Great Circle does not allow for multiple gameplay styles in this regard. Instead, you are forced to creepily sneak around in a crouch for 80% of the game with your hands always lightly grasping the air like some alleyway molester. And the stealth mechanics are laughably bad. Most of this game takes place in large open outdoor areas in broad daylight, and they've contrived a stealth system where you can be in open areas in the line of sight of most of these enemies, and as long as you crouch down, they won't notice you going right by them most of the time. It's lunacy, and for all of their claims that they've designed the Great Circle for full immersion as Indiana Jones, this kind of stuff is constantly reminding you that you're playing a really busted game. Most of these enemies are watching you crab walk right by them a few feet away, and they're just like, whatever. Other times, you're faced with a scenario where there is no stealth option, like this area. How am I supposed to get down there unseen? And why does it take them so long to react to this shambling snail of a game character? The developers made it clear in the run-up to the game's launch that choosing violence in this game would result in a kind of punishment brought on you in the form of overwhelming numbers of enemies and very little chance of winning the fight. Instead, you're expected to get behind as many people as you can and bludgeon them to death with heavy objects.
Che sei?
Non puoi stare qui.
Pleasure's all mine.
Murder!
While you can fistfight, the success rate of doing so is only within sight if you can guarantee there aren't more than 2 guys facing off with you at any point. And you better hope that one of them isn't a big dude and that both of them are without firearms. Also, you better have upgraded your health and stamina as well. Otherwise, you'll be lucky to take on one head-on, much less multiples. This is where the skill building mechanic in the game becomes laughable. You're expected to earn points that will allow you to unlock the contents of various books found throughout the world locations. And this is one of the many examples where the gaminess of Great Circle gets in the way of the Indiana Jones experience. They're all based around the silliest upgrades, such as making melee items deliver more damage, or, in one case, making your hat into an automatic saving throw to give you one last chance to avoid death. We'll get back to this one. The game is designed against you using firearms without facing severe environmental penalties, such as entire Nazi garrisons being alerted and converging on your position within seconds. You are given the option to upgrade the damage done by pistols in one instance and rifles in another. And this is absolutely stupid. This game is supposed to be realistically immersive, and yet they now suggest Indy can just have deadlier bullets than before. So I guess Indy has the tools needed to put bigger powder loads in bullets he finds, even though the programmers specifically prefer you use fists and improvisational melee weapons over guns. Because as we all know, hitting someone with your full strength in the back of a head with a sledgehammer is totally more humane than shooting them.
Don't call me Junior.
Would it make you feel any better, little girl, if they was pushed out of windows?
Look out below. Hell of a drop.
Murder!
And the power curve of these enemies in combat situations is completely out of whack. Hand weapons break very easily, so you'll only get a few swings before you're weaponless, and with no easy opportunity to pick something else up off the ground without getting trounced. As I feared when I learned this game would be first person, the enemies with guns have an overt advantage in this format, and begin shooting you without mercy while you're shambling over to close the distance. The first person disadvantage gets worse with boss fight events. Because of that lucky hat upgrade I mentioned, the designers felt certain fights shouldn't allow you to have that option. So in most of the biggest fights in the game, which there aren't many to begin with, they find some contrived reason for Indy to lose his hat right before the confrontation. They try to disguise this as part of the writing, but it's all about keeping the player from being able to have that skill, likely because they didn't want the player to have a last-ditch chance to win in these specific fights. And with most of the game putting Indy in alternate outfits, all of those fights in those situations are also unable to use that lucky hat skill by default, since he isn't wearing it with those clothes. And because of the first-person format and the immense freedom the disguises give you, Machine Games have compelled every gamer with common sense to take Indiana Jones out of 90% of his own game, and instead just be some guy doing day hikes in Halloween costumes.
He's wearing the bag underneath it? Oh, for the love. Oh my god, I'm a priest with a bullwhip on my... Oh.
The power levels of the enemies are inconsistent as hell. Soldiers in Siam are so overpowered, you spend the entire location desperate to stay in the bushes because you'll never survive an encounter with two of them, and likely not even one if it's one of the many big guys that make up the Royal Army soldiers. However, the final boss fight with the Nazi leader Voss is surprisingly easy, which is weird since the cannon fodder guards from the previous level are so intimidatingly dangerous. And when you are fighting enemies hand to hand, particularly Tony Todd and Voss, the first-person shortcomings are in your face yet again. First person is excellent for shooters because it's about aiming more than determining exact range. However, in a stealth and hand combat game, it is an infuriating experience because you do not have exact depth perception. If these mechanics are off in the slightest, the game will have an unfair advantage, and Great Circle has this in spades. Some enemies like Big Guys, Voss, and Tony Todd cannot be blocked and only dodged. But even when you jump several feet out of the way, their swings at the air still manage to connect with you, somehow. It's infuriating to say the least. Additionally, if they grab you, the game tells you to press the triggers to get out of their hold. But it never works. You're just going through the motions until they inevitably toss you to the ground for more damage.
The fighting in Great Circle absolutely blows due to inconsistent game mechanics, and from a gameplay standpoint, you never feel like you can master it.
While I couldn't easily beat anyone in Siam, I found myself back in the Vatican at one point and had the entire garrison sandwich me in an alley. Somehow, I survived the entire encounter, but I knew I'd never be able to replicate that in other scenarios. Again, more of those uneven combat mechanics.
Allora, hai paura? Faccio secco! Dagli una lezione!
Andiamo, Sene!
Così si fa! Fai ridere! Accidenti! Farmi ridere! Eccolo, ti vedo! Sei finito! Forza, levagli quel sorrisetto! Avvertimi quando fai sul serio! Potrei sbatterti anche da me!
It's the opposite of satisfying, and it certainly doesn't feel like you're playing as Indiana Jones.
There's a lot of stupid stuff like that in this allegedly realistic game. For example, Indy can throw a torch, but he can't throw a lit candle. Why? Dunno. Because the game says so.
The guns are worse because not only do they come with stiff environmental penalties if used, but they also have contrived limitations by the programmers to keep you relatively defenseless. Found weapons cannot be loaded, and only the sidearms that come with some of your outfits throughout the game can get extra ammo. All rifles and submachine guns lifted from a downed enemy cannot be reloaded with other ammo sources. But Indy will literally drop these weapons if he has to climb up a ladder, or crawl under a narrow space, or put on a bandage, or eat a f***ing biscotti? The game uses every excuse to have him abandon his defenses. At one point at the end of the Vatican location, I had a fully loaded submachine gun, and Indy inexplicably ditched it for another protracted cutscene. In the context of the character, it makes no sense. In the context of the story, it made even less. The programmers simply needed Indy to be at the mercy of the bad guys in that scene, so anything he was holding had to be given up. It's flat out ridiculous. One of my favorite firearm quirks of the game is that when you drop a weapon, you're not guaranteed to find it again. Note here, after I'm done, I look down on the ground. Where did the rifle go? No idea. It just disappeared into the ether. And this happened a staggering amount of times in my playthrough. It got to the point where I had to manually look at the ground and drop the rifle beforehand to verify where it was at my feet before putting on a bandage or eating a cookie. The one that drove me the most nuts was the discovery that Indy only carries 6 rounds for his revolver, and whole boxes of ammunition that are scantily placed throughout the game only contain 2 rounds each. Talk about realism, I tell ya.
Son of a bitch.
To make matters worse, the reload process for the revolver is so complicated, it's a farce.
The programmers are forcing the player to abandon the gun as an option with every single decision they've made developing this aspect of the game. Honestly, they should have just had the balls to delete guns from the game entirely. Having them in the way they're implemented only further breaks an already broken experience. Indy will reload his revolver only on command, not automatically. And he'll do it 1 round at a time. What you have to understand about this is how asinine that concept is, considering Machine Games are supposed to be the game company that knows 20th century military history. Indiana Jones carries a Smith & Wesson M1917, a World War I service revolver. At this time in history, those revolvers were most often loaded with either half or full moon clips. This made reloading them much, much faster. How do I know this? I own both the M1917 and its civilian cousin, the Model 22. With preloaded clips, you can grab a mere handful for your satchel and you're sitting pretty on almost 100 rounds easily. Point is, there's no excuse for Indiana Jones to travel with only 6 bullets, and definitely no excuse for his reload time to take so long. Machine Games cocked up this entire aspect of the Great Circle in a big way. Insult is only added to injury when you find expensive upgrade options to carry more ammunition. And just as with many other Indiana Jones games, with the exception of the Temple of Doom arcade game and the Emperor's Tomb, the bullwhip is pretty much useless in combat. On the rare occasions you're only dealing with a single combatant, you have a chance to disarm them, but otherwise it's a useless delay tactic that only alerts other guards to your location, or wastes time while another guy shoots you, so it also tends to remain stowed in combat. Other upgrades are supposed to increase your climbing speed, since Indy moves slower than geology. The programmers and their defenders claim this is by design because Indiana Jones is a bumbling guy who is just getting by. But this is supposed to be a video game, with momentum, excitement, and some level of satisfying gameplay. Not a single one of these upgrades made an observable difference in Indy's speed or agility. And if you don't get these upgrades, which the game does little to guide you toward, you can end up bypassing the lion's share of them and find yourself pretty far along in the game as you're encouraged to avoid combat, and then stuck in a combat instance like this one with Tony Todd that you can't avoid, but suddenly you're in a situation where you don't have the health or stamina needed to win the fight. And the autosave system locks you there with your only choice being to restart the entire area, which would be pointless as the upgrades you need were in previous parts of the game anyway. You can't go forward, and going backward would be you conceding to a massive immersion break where you'd place yourself at a point to quick travel back to old locations to try and find those upgrades. The game has effectively soft-locked you, and the quick travel mechanic only shows you even more of the designer's mistakes where, when you return to old locations, it acts more like time travel, because characters like Gina who travel with you to other countries are miraculously returned there as well in their previous states, so you can complete side quests that involved them at earlier points in the story. The designers of Great Circle clearly had just as much trouble balancing making a video game against their flawed vision of an Indiana Jones experience as they were incapable of balancing their first-person format against constant third-person transitions, and their inability to balance actual gameplay with cinematic cutscenes. Climb a ladder? Third person. Climb a thingy? Third person. Swing on a whip? Third person. Pick a lane, Machine Games. But the reason they tried to thread this needle is because they know first person is a bag of dicks in anything except shooters and flight sims. That's why just as often as enemies manage to hit you when you're 7 feet away, the difficulty in judging distances when platforming in first person is so horrendous, they lean heavily into magic magnetism, so Indy can just reach areas where you can feel yourself totally failing the jump. Given how slow and cumbersome the play controls are, so many times in this game, you'll be staring at a jump knowing there's no way in hell these game controls would allow you to reach the other side. But then you can't find any alternate path and you just have to go for it, and as you completely miss the other side, it will whip out to third person and Indy will warp over the last few feet and pull himself up.
It's so damn stupid for a AAA game with this level of production budget.
Can you swing on a whip consistently? Nope, because the play control is reliably unreliable. So enjoy falling to your death a lot. And before the simps for this game start screaming, "Sounds like a skill issue," I cleared this game, and not on easy mode. And I've cleared many frustrating games in the past 4 decades.
Just because a game is beatable, that doesn't mean problems don't exist.
Plus, I have to laugh at all of the gamers and fanboys insisting this is a video game. Because there are so many damn cinematics, I think calling it a video game is thin. The pattern of this game is play for a few minutes, always doing something boring, tedious, or repetitive, usually all 3, and then watch an overly long cinematic that goes on without mercy for the player. The Great Circle achieved something that as a PC gamer going back 40 years, I'd never seen before. The cinematic scenes in the Great Circle became so interminable, my own monitor forgot the game was still active. In 2 places, the monitor clearly had enough and went to sleep as if the game had paused. The sound was still going, but the monitor said, "I'm done."
And frankly, I can't blame it. In fact, I'm surprised the monitor didn't black out during actual gameplay. Because it's so boring, I almost did several times.
And the cinematics can get so stupidly lengthy that the autosave system, which warns you when your last save point occurred, can sometimes place you more than 15 minutes from the reload point, because the game has a terrible habit of forcing you to rewatch cinematics you're not allowed to skip past. One such instance is in that fight with Tony Todd. Every time you get trounced by him, you're forced to watch that cinematic over again before the next try. It's hilariously bad planning on the part of the game developer. It's also laughable where it puts you when you do reload the checkpoint. Take this instance, where I decided to double check my save point. Notice I'm driving the boat when I back out of the game. When I immediately come back into the game, even though I'm in the same spot, they put me 25 feet away from the boat where I have to swim to it and get back into it to continue my gameplay. That is beyond annoying on its face, but because of the way Indy shambles around in this game, it makes it even more of a chore.
It's just one more useless experience.
Additionally, somehow the designers of this game decided that on top of viewing Indiana Jones as a stealth character who didn't use guns, they also thought the best plan for an Indiana Jones experience was a global photo scavenger hunt format. You get a camera in the Vatican and you take photos all over the place with it. And somehow you don't have to develop them ever. Indy can just toss out the prints like he's a human Polaroid. More often, you don't do anything with the photos except collect those points to earn the skills locked in those stupid books.
All of this reeks of gamer culture's addiction to fetch quests and skill trees.
And when you combine that with long stretches of wandering around in disguises looking for random crap, anyone saying this game is so amazing and feels like you're Indiana Jones is out of their damn mind. Do you really think breaking into safes and figuring out the combination locks of footlockers and stealing people's money while they're not looking is Indiana Jones? That's really all you do in this game is take photos and commit petty theft.
It's one thing to say you enjoyed this game. Okay, sure. The world's a twisted place. Many people unironically like all kinds of lame things. But to go the extra mile and say this feels like Indiana Jones? Don't lie to yourself.
Indie fanboys and the Temple of Cope.
Dr. Jones, this game boring.
And the stretches of dry, wandering gameplay are made worse by how slow Indiana Jones is in navigating these areas. The first-person perspective only enhances this sense of slowness, and if you try to run places, you'll run down your stamina bar, which you need to climb, fight, and probably take a photo. And the boat in Siam, which you putter around to go from island to island while constantly staring at your map, is also pointless at the end of the day, because in navigating all of these waters, there are no threats to you in the process. There is no gameplay beyond tediously looking at the map to frustratingly navigate between these waterways to get to the next objective. Suffice to say, there's no gameplay in the gameplay of the boat. It's just another huge waste of time. And the game teases you constantly with all of these vehicles sitting around, all of these trucks and motorcycles and jeeps, and you can't use any of them. They're just window dressing, which in a game like this, with a character this slow, in areas this big, is a brutal middle finger to the player, and a real cop-out. And not only is it a cop-out, but it sucks that you can't use the vehicles, because that's what Indiana Jones always did. Steal a truck, steal a motorcycle, steal a car. Steal a boat. Steal a...
No camels.
They tease you with it endlessly here like fan pandering, but aside from an on-rails airplane level and one on-rails action scene in that boat, Indy's hoofing it the whole time. The game has these sparsely located signposts that allow for fast travel, but they're not really marked on your map. They take forever to find, and they're often sporting weird area names and labels that make guesswork out of whether you're jumping to the closest point to your intended destination. And even then, most of the time, you still have a day hike to go from the signpost to your objective. And one of the biggest regrets of this open world format is just how artificial it really is, particularly where Egypt is concerned. In the other locations, you do have natural boundaries, like in the Vatican or in the Himalayas or even in Siam. But for an Indiana Jones game to let you walk right up to one of the Great Pyramids and not climb it, and instead pull these contrived, bleary-eyed, I'm getting too hot moments to keep you in the boundaries of the playable area.
So hot. Nothing but dunes and heat.
For an Indiana Jones game where you effectively can't free explore famous monuments, that really sucks. Because let's not forget, you can free roam all the famous monuments and locations in Assassin's Creed Origins. But in the first AAA Indiana Jones game with an entire location being Egypt and Giza no less, no, you gotta go where they tell you to go. And while we're on the subject of the map, you'll constantly be referencing it because the objective markers for tracked missions only remain on screen for 3 seconds or less after the map is put away. Probably more of that immersion concept bullshit from machine games. When you bring the map up, the programmers don't even give you the courtesy of having the entire map come up into view. Half of it is always out of frame and you have to lower your view to the ground to see all of it. Which means you'll spend most of your gaming experience walking around like a clueless tourist or some teenager with their head buried in their mobile phone.
Very Indiana Jones. Am I right?
And you spend so much time out in the periphery of the game's narrative searching for photo ops and lost bonus artifacts that look like ancient stone dildos that it becomes tough to remember what the plot of the game was when you finally re-engage with the main story. And this isn't helped by the fact the writers crafted a quest through line that is really convoluted and uninteresting. You're looking for these stones, and the Nazis are also looking for these stones, and the stones are at various places all over the world, like Egypt and Siam. A lot of them are in the Vatican archives. They're tied to some ancient language that Gina's missing sister was an expert in, or something. So there's this pattern of finding stones and then immediately having the Nazis take them from you. So you're not even given the excitement in the game of building the collection of stones to a conclusion. There's no slowly growing set of these stones in your inventory. The bad guys keep taking all of them.
And while that might be indicative of an Indiana Jones movie, it's terrible for satisfying gameplay.
It's as if machine games took all the wrong aspects of modern video games that bogged down action-adventure rather than the ones that would have served an Indiana Jones gaming experience best. This game does not reward your real-world instincts in these matters, nor even reward your growing experience with the game itself, even as the studio claims it aimed to maximize realism and immersion. For example, if you've paid attention to even 15 minutes of a classic Indiana Jones movie, you wouldn't think of approaching a guard shack that looks like this, especially not after you've already had the shit kicked out of you by these guys in other areas of the game. Looking above you reveals zip lines and ledges similar to others you've traversed already, so you assume you'll need to find a different way around. But no, you're just expected to walk through there with nobody checking your papers, even though random dudes get suspicious of you constantly when you're just standing around.
Damn it, he's on to me.
So you tell me how I go through there without getting my ass handed to me. What, can I just walk past these guys? You tell me I can just walk past these guys. Because I got my ass kicked just being near a tent. What is this? Okay, look. I can walk into or near a tent and get killed, but I can walk through this checkpoint? How does that even work? Yeah, thanks for letting me in here after you killed me in a courtyard that was not even this heavily guarded. Oh, look at that. Now they're on top of me. Now they're on top of me. I'm not going to fight them. I'm just going to let them beat me up. I don't even care. Is this guy the officer? This guy right here? Because he's got like the white sash and stuff? Alright, fine. Take that, you asshole. Take it. Let's just Grand Theft Auto this shit.
The game's demonstrated mechanics and the Indiana Jones atmosphere together create a scenario where anyone with common sense would assume that area is unapproachable.
But in yet another moment of Great Circle's endless stupidity, you're just expected to stroll right on past that guard shack. Because why wouldn't you?
As for the story itself, it's a joke. All of this chasing for stones you never hold on to takes you across a series of fan-pandering locations from previous Indiana Jones films in rapid succession. Starting in Peru and Marshall College leads Indy to Italy before Egypt, and then into the Himalayas before a silly portal opens up through use of one of the stones that drops them in Shanghai.
I don't have to tell you why that portal thing is stupid, because you've seen Dial of Destiny. This is more of that crap.
Siam is where the Indiana Jones-ish side of the game is allowed to strut slightly more than previous locations, due to generally more gameplay and a new environment that isn't a callback to the films. But it's also where the story once again goes up its own rear, trying to force the issue of Marion back into the game, while Indy, dealing with his regrets, is also shown attempting to mac on Gina like a pathetic loser. Each Indiana Jones film had a new female lead in the classic days of the franchise, so had Machine Games been smart about the writing and kept the Marion factor out of the story, this whole thing with Gina wouldn't have made Indiana Jones look like a jerk. But I guess Disney has to keep taking swings at the very characters they're selling us, to the extent that, like a desperate chump, he tries to get Gina to stay with him at the end of the game, and she's like, nah. I'd like to laugh at this, but even the comedy in the game is random and doesn't land.
Hold still.
They make multiple attempts at funny stuff between Indy and Gina, and it never comes off. Like this random moment where Indy can't lift himself out of this dig site, and we're supposed to find that hilarious.
Dai, muoviti, strambo!
I'm trying.
But it simply comes off as weird because we've just finished a search in an ancient tomb where we've done all kinds of physical stunts. Plus, we've gone up and down this very ledge multiple times in-game, so the whole moment is just dumb. And there are scores of bad attempts at humor like this throughout Great Circle that just fall flat. I can't even call things like this amateurish. They're just strange.
Where's my hat?
He's here.
But probably the worst bit of characterization is the main villain, Voss, who up until the climax of the game is just another tired Nazi bad guy. However, it's within the final 20 minutes of gameplay that his character takes a hard pivot and reveals,
I have mastered the lethal Japanese hand-to-hand combat art of karate.
This is, without a doubt, the cheesiest character pivot I've seen in pretty much anything.
And I own the entire Ninja trilogy. Who's writing this game? A 6-year-old?
From here on, Voss is throwing out more lines about karate until the bitter end, and that's after he's simply been a Nazi scientist for what feels like 72 hours of lagging gameplay.
I warned you, Indiana. I know karate!
Now he's an aspiring Bruce Lee that can also hang Indy's whip off his suit vest by magic. Meanwhile, the plot reveals that all of the stones are designed to allow someone to instantaneously travel to various points around the globe. So Voss wants to use that power in conjunction with a final large construct I won't reveal because it's just too groan-inducing for words, to instantly transport Nazi armies into enemy nations. But for some reason that isn't well explained, the device doesn't work the way he thought. You have to fight him without your hat because you can't be allowed to use that dumb skill you weren't using anyway. The big device randomly melts him for no good reason, except the lame writers of this felt like it isn't Indiana Jones without a melting Nazi, and the game is finally over. I wish I could say the Great Circle became fun to play after a certain point, but even many of its apologists will try and tell you that after this point, it starts to get good, or after you get past this, it gets better. And that's simply not a great testimonial for a AAA game title. Unlike the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider, which wisely picked a third-person perspective and knew how to keep the cinematic action at the forefront to drive the plot forward, keep the stakes rising, and compel you to find out what awaits you at the end of the story, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle mires itself in modern gaming tropes at the fatal expense of action-adventure momentum and authentic indie-style atmosphere. Yes, there are tombs in the game, and yes, there are crypts, and yes, there are lost areas and ancient temples, but they're very brief, and the Indiana Jones-style puzzles that they put in your way, while existent, there aren't enough of them, and they're fairly simple. Figuring out some of the combination locks for those foot lockers were harder than the main quest puzzles, and that is really pathetic.
Not familiar with Polybius Cipher?
The point I'm trying to make is the main story flies by, while all of the busy work over here is where they put all the stupid challenges, in all the non-Indiana Jones stuff. Thank goodness they didn't forget the ultimate modern video game cliche of a hallucination level. And once again, even with some of the centerpiece quest puzzles, like the big fountain in the Vatican, you're standing there in broad daylight after having navigated past all of these fascist goons, and the sun is beating down on you, and this thing is opening up right there out front, making a lot of noise, and conveniently, none of those fascists from right over that wall come running up to find out what's going on, even though their trucks are parked right behind you.
All of these people have tried to tell me what an amazing game this is and how it's what Dial of Destiny should have been and how I'll love it. But all I've learned is there are a hell of a lot of people out there who have a very different, very shallow perspective on what a good Indiana Jones adventure looks like.
I'm sad to report that my favorite thing about the game has nothing to do with the game itself. While Great Circle's post-game open-world sandbox isn't anywhere near as fun as other games due to the gameplay's inherent limitations, the most fun I had with Great Circle was going back to Egypt, going into the most heavily garrisoned Nazi compound, collecting a bunch of weapons and throwing them in the floor of the secured storage area, then starting shenanigans to pull all of the stupid AI enemies into a bottleneck of death, and then tossing all the bodies out the window to see how high up to the windowsill the pile would go. I know that sounds macabre as hell, and totally sick. And it is. But in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, you have to make your own fun. If there's one thing this game has taught me, it's that an experience can be so forgettable, you'll have to take a picture, because it's the only thing that'll last.
Oh my god! Taking photographs of kitty cats right before I get beaten up by a gang of thugs in a piazza? Let me grab my hat and cue the music!
What the fuck?